Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach, and we have some breaking news for you. The Supreme Court has entered a brief stay in President Trump's White House ballroom construction case. That means that the build can continue as the justices decide how they will handle the legal challenges it faces moving forward. The court did not make a decision on the underlying legal issues, which includes a challenge to the $400 million project, which, as you'll recall, was started without congressional approval. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins us now with more legal context. So, Jan, this pauses the lower court's injunction that was going to pause the construction tonight. So what does all of this mean?
You know, what they did within the last few minutes is a really common procedural way that courts can just kind of preserve the status quo and keep things in place while they're deciding how they're going to handle some kind of emergency request, which is this case. As you mentioned, they had that looming deadline of midnight tonight when a lower court injunction that would have just blocked the ballroom project, the above ground part of it completely, that was going to take effect. That would obviously have then stopped the construction. So the Supreme Court, in a very short turnaround, they only had a few short days to consider all the briefing, decided with the Chief Justice acting on behalf of the court to enter this kind of brief pause so they could kind of take a look at the case, decide how they're going to handle it as they move forward. But as you said, we cannot read anything into this. There's no clues. It doesn't tell us how the court's ultimately going to resolve this issue. For example, the lower court, which ended up ruling against President Trump and the ballroom, entered the same kind of brief stay when it was deciding how to handle these kind of legal issues. So this is a very common procedural move, and it means that now the justices will have some time to make a more reasoned decision on how they want to handle this case. And if they're going to agree with the lower court decision and block this project, or if they are going to say that the Trump administration and President Trump specifically has the authority to continue the project.
So, Jen, you mentioned that it's a common procedural move, and it feels like it's becoming more of a common move. In the past, oftentimes stays or injunctions would be issued so that things would stop. In this case, it's allowing construction to continue. So what happens now, and what happens ultimately if a decision's made after the construction project is mostly done?
So that's a really great point, Lana, because it does seem to be happening more now because the Trump administration has got a lot more emergency appeals going throughout the court system. You know, people are challenging things that the Trump administration is trying to do, and then they're filing emergency briefs saying, no, we should be able to do that. So the courts are really bearing the brunt of all of this kind of urgency that both sides are saying they have to decide these cases with. This, again, like I said, is this common way of trying to kind of just put things on pause, slow things down, and let's decide it. But just like the lower court entered the same kind of pause when it was trying to decide how it was going to handle these issues, and they came out against Trump, this court could do the same thing, this brief pause, and make a completely different decision. It doesn't tell us anything. It's just a way of saying, let's take a breath for a minute and make a more reasoned decision. Now, when we get to the merits, that's going to be the big deal. When the Supreme Court does issue, and I don't think we'll get anything before next week at the soonest, when they do decide how they're going to handle this, that will then set the tone for how the construction can or cannot continue. The lower courts in this case said no. Trump has no authority to do this. You've got to stop the construction. You can finish the underground security facilities, but no above ground stuff, nothing. The Trump administration is saying that itself raises national security concerns, and we need to be able to do this ballroom, and we have the authority to do it. So that's what we're waiting on, that decision from the court. Whether Trump can build this ballroom, that's what we're talking about, or whether the lower court rulings will stay in place more permanently and will stop this project.
And, Jan, this will strike many as a win, at least temporarily, for the administration, if not a definitive win, at least a temporary one. And honestly, as you pointed out, it's a mess. Right now, it is an open construction site at the White House. Do we know if the Supreme Court will ultimately rule on this case, or if they're going to ultimately kick it back to the lower court to make the decision? And when do we expect any of this to be resolved?
Right. Well, so what we have now is this kind of preliminary, these are preliminary issues, and the lower court granted this kind of emergency injunction to stop this construction now, right? That's where we are. And now the court has put that on pause while they decide how they're going to handle it. But, you know, what this means going forward is sure. I mean, if the court rules against the Trump administration, then that would be potentially the end of this ballroom project. Now, there are or if they rule for the Trump administration, that means construction can continue like it is right now and like it's been, you know, going on now for quite some time. But there are other ways other people could try to challenge the ballroom. I don't think this would be the end of all the legal challenges. Perhaps there are other organizations that could try to file a lawsuit. Perhaps there are different arguments that they could make trying to attack, for example, the funding and how the funding is going for this ballroom. So a win for the Trump administration ultimately from the Supreme Court, which, as to your question, I think would not happen before the next week, 2, maybe 3, who knows. That would be very significant, but it wouldn't necessarily mean the end of any kind of legal efforts to stop this project. I think you're going to try to see some people come up with some pretty creative legal arguments. They're not going to give up that easily.
All right, Jan, good to see you. Jan Crawford.
Thanks.